faces and new faces. We will be recording this session. My name is Bob Hawkins. I'm our global lead for technology and innovation in education here at the World Bank. It's fantastic to be together with you today. This is a continuation of a community that we started actually a few years ago now, looking at frontier technologies in education and their impact on, particularly from our perspective, the clients and colleagues and educators in the developing world. This was called, we started off with blockchain technologies. We had a series of 6 seminars over the course of the year looking at the impact of this technology on empowering content creators, empowering new networks of educators, looking at ways in which the technology could democratize the ownership of content, and really looking at ways in which the technology could facilitate a network of value exchange in education systems. Issues around equity, ownership, trust, empowerment all came out during this session. We met in September, and then right around that time, AI started to explode. And we thought this would be an opportune time to reconvene this group to really focus on what has happened since we last got together in September, specifically in the field of AI. And we'll be looking across a number of themes with regard to the impact that AI has had so far in education systems, looking at some of the issues around the role of AI with regard to equity and democratization, the impact that AI is having on skills and particularly on assessment, and finally, the impact that AI is having on the opportunities to create new content and expand the democratization of educational content. For these sessions, it's very informal. We want to have a conversation, so there'll be no presentations. We encourage you all to introduce yourself in the chat, drop your name in there, the organization you're from. If there are any specific projects that you're working on, please make some links to those projects. And as we engage in the conversation, we want to make sure that we surface questions that you might have, either in general or specifically to any of the comments that emerge from this discussion. So please drop your questions into the chat as well. If you really want to join, raise your hand and we'll bring you into the conversation as well. So with that as kind of a framing for what we want to accomplish today, let me pass over to Chris from the Learning Economy Foundation to give a little bit of an overview, and then we'll kick off with our first discussion. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, hi everyone. I just wanted to say hello for the year. It's good to have everyone back again and to be convening here in 2023. This is kind of continuing, as he said, from the sessions we've been doing throughout the years, and obviously technology is moving faster than ever. So this is an opportune time to be looking at some of these challenges. And we'll have, Beth kick us off by talking about some of the ethics in this and kind of looking at, some of the maybe unforeseen issues, but also, some of the opportunities. And then we'll get into the, to the details of how this could drastically change, affect, enhance, or hurt our education systems. So exciting times here. And, as we head into this, we started as the Web3 Education Alliance, and specifically around the concept of, learners having kind of ownership and control over their records so that we could solve some of these really big challenges. And I think that is even more true today than ever, as we start thinking about AI democratization and AI in education, how do we start to train some of these personalized AI bots? I think becomes really critical in how we control the data. And so data, I don't know if you saw some of the sessions yesterday on the Hill, Beth and I were talking about that right before we started, but I think data and understanding the control of that and how that works is going to be really important. And so let's just get right into it. So I'll turn it over to Beth actually to kind of give us a primer to set us up, and then we'll get into some discussions.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. I've been working in artificial intelligence and building AI for a very long time. And I want to start off with a story. I actually, I spent about 22 years at IBM, the last 7 years as a technical executive, and I started off our trustworthy AI center of excellence, and it's the largest global trustworthy AI center of excellence in the world. And yesterday I got to see Christina Montgomery, who used to be our general counsel or used to be IBM's general counsel. I've since started my own company. But when I was working for IBM, one of my main clients was Citibank. And Citibank, I got to talk to the global chief economist. And this was back at the time where everybody was really trying to get onto a cloud and do cloud transformation and understand cloud services, which I would purport that many people are still in that type of transformation. And he and I were talking about, you know, the way that Citibank and large global economies are really functioning. And he was talking about how IBM really needed to get off their butt and secure the cloud because they really wanted to do this digital transformation. And they wanted to make sure that people could really trust that that the data, you know, was going to be there. And I started probing, and I was like, you know, are you worried about fraud? Are you worried about, you know, what are your concerns? What's the problem that you're solving? And he's like, we have an $80 billion kitty in FDIC for our fraud. He goes, I'm not worried about fraud. He goes, we're covered. We have insurance. He goes, what I'm really worried about is small nations looking at their cell phones and seeing a zero balance and having a run on the bank. He's worried about decivilization. And I was just gobsmacked because I understood, you know, two things at that moment. That, you know, when people are responsible and accountable for things that are much bigger than themselves, they carry a notion that they understand that not only the value that they are bringing to their organization, but they understand their responsibility and their talents for, or their responsibility for the talents that they are given with the power. And, you know, this is when I was watching, you know, Christina Montgomery, and she and I have been on several panels together. And, you know, when we established the ethical principles for governance for IBM, we really, and this was actually back in 2017, and another friend of mine, Adam Cutler, and we wanted to design 3 principles that everyone could immediately understand. And I want to make a small, you know, diversion here. And when I'm using the word ethics, I have a background in Greek and Latin, and I'm a linguist, so I'm the squishy human type data scientist. And, you know, ethics comes from the word ethos, and ethos means atmosphere. And what I try to make sure that everybody understands is I'm not talking about the ethics of the singularity and whether we should treat artificial intelligence as an intelligent being. I am talking about the adulting that every single human being can do in order to set up the ethos, in order to understand what are the behaviors that you want your humans to do? What is the culture that you want to set up? A great example of an ethos is if you walk into a Roman Catholic church in torn up jeans and start cussing, you immediately feel wrong. You know that that is the wrong behavior because of all of the social signals that are given. So when we set up the ethos, we wanted the culture to be indemnified into the human being and understood by every single person in IBM, 350,000 humans. And now that I'm building my own AI software, these are also the principles that I follow, as well as the things that I desperately want people to start to understand, that they have the power and the responsibility to start setting up this ethos or this atmosphere so that you can establish culture. And remember, culture is something that you do when no one else is around. So this isn't something where you have to govern and, you know, make sure that people are doing. Instead, just like my child, who is the teenager who says, Mom, I need you to explain why I have to follow the rules. I'm going to try to articulate why you need to follow these 3 principles so that you truly understand that you have the accountability to set up the ethos or the atmosphere in order to use AI in a way that augments human beings, which is the very first principle. And the reason why is a business reason. If you're building artificial intelligence to augment a person, and that person understands that you are trying to empower and enable them, that person will adopt the AI so that you can actually get your business value out of the AI. It's very simple. The second principle is data and insights belongs to the user. Back to my Latin, data comes from do or dare, which means to give. It is something that is given. It is an artifact of human behavior, of human experience. What are you going to give that person in return? How are you going to reciprocate? Data and insights belong to their users. Everything that we do today feels off. It feels out of balance. And a lot of that is because large companies are scraping our data without our consent and using it in order to create algorithms. If we change this paradigm and we understand our own accountability for our own data ownership, everything changes. When you interact with the AI I'm building using your data, it feels totally different. It feels totally different to interact with an AI that you actually trust. And the third principle is very simple too. Every single AI system is completely explainable and transparent. If the AI model cannot tell you why it gave you that prediction, then the designers, the system creators, the companies that are creating that AI are not working hard enough. And so every AI system should be rendered explainable and transparent. And I literally get told on a daily basis that that's impossible. It is possible. It is something that we can all do. And it is something that we should all urgently demand the lineage and provenance for every single piece of data that goes into an AI system that should be rendered explainable and transparent. So I wanted to set you guys up with those three principles. And I think a good example in education that I just, I put on LinkedIn about is Sal Khan and Khan Academy. And he just released his AI assistant. The very first thing that he says is look, the AI assistant, and there's a note on there that says, your teacher can see everything that you're doing in this chat. That sets up the ethos for the student, and it sets up the understanding that that AI system is being monitored by a human being or by a teacher. And it hopefully redirects the student to make sure that they understand that they're there to study, not ask the AI whether they're wearing pants.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Beth, for these reflections. This was a discussion that we went in depth on during prior meetings around the use of blockchain and ownership. This issue around culture, and is there a universal culture? How do you think about representing and respecting different cultures, different languages, different priorities? But I think you've touched on a few key universal themes that are kind of touching at the nerve of what a lot of educators are dealing with regard to trust. How can you trust the information that you're given? How do you prepare students for misinformation on the internet? How do you create an ethos around cheating, around representing your work in a truthful manner? Responsibility and accountability of being responsible for the way you interact with the technology. And then finally, the issue of transparency and kind of the ownership around the data, I think is really key. So thanks, Beth, for kind of setting this framework. And I'd like us to kind of continue to debate what is this ethos and does it apply universally across the different countries that we work in. Let's kick off the discussion, because I think one of the key aspects of culture and ethos is around the opportunities for equity in the use of technology, as well as democratization, which implies kind of empowerment of the end users. This is a theme that John Goodwin, who was with the Lego Foundation, now with Learning Economy Foundation, brought up a lot in our prior discussions. And I want John, I wonder if I can ask you to jump in to kind of kick off your thinking around how technology can most effectively be used to ensure equity and democratization. John? If John is not with us or he's having technical problems, let me move to Anthony Maddox, who is also a a stringent advocate for democracy. He's at USC. And for all of these introductions, please go ahead and introduce yourself and just kind of kick off the discussion. So Anthony, let me go to you while we're sorting John.
Thanks, Bob. Good day, everybody. Anthony Maddox here. I'm a professor of clinical education and engineering at the University of Southern California. And I've done AI stuff a long time ago, started in the 80s and started coding in 75. But now I'm a science teacher educator, and I've been a science teacher educator now for about 13 years. And I see slowly some things happening. My class sizes are getting smaller. And the number of science teachers that are actually getting into the classroom and staying in the classroom are also getting smaller. So our new dean, Pedro Noguera, I've gotten his attention to start talking about in schools of education, what it means for schools of education to be involved in this development of these technologies, to have a voice in what's happening in various kinds of learning environments, at the same time, trying to understand better what it means to have that voice and how do you instill that into teacher education programs, how do you see it in schools, and how do we now start to work with individuals like you all over the world and try to figure out how this is going to work relative to teachers and the availability of teachers. In the United States, we find there aren't enough teachers. This is supposed to be a high-income country. It is, but we still don't have enough teachers. And in other parts of the world, we don't have enough teachers either. So what can we learn, honestly? What can we learn from other individuals in different parts of the world about how they're dealing with moving AI into their educational environments, how they can now start to understand and teach us in a really interesting way what that means. How can we help use their experiences to guide us in the process of learning how to have a role in this particular world? That's what we're looking for. So we're closely aligned with the Viterbi School of Engineering and two initiatives that USC have started recently, one on generative AI and one on another larger AI kind of effort, if you will. So we're trying to figure that out and see how it fits in. My initial thoughts are, we need to restructure in some sense what education looks like for teachers and to change the very way in which we now start to do business. And one reference I'll give you is the Carnegie hours. And for those who don't know, in the United States, it's the number of hours you spend literally sitting in front of someone doing something. Well, if you think about what that means and the time you spend sitting down in a seat and having things happen, it is a late 18th century, early 19th century kind of model, actually late 19th century and early 20th century type of model. So we need something different. We need something different that says that you spend so much time in front of an individual and learning a certain kind of thing, PowerPoint slides sliding before you, that type of thing. It needs to change. So this automaton that now we're talking about, or those automata that are in these systems, in these classrooms, how do they work with teachers? How is this kind of equilibrium, if you will, found? And in a game theoretic sense, how do you now start to find a kind of an equilibrium where all the players in the game actually are now trying to really understand and use and buy into, and maybe a Nash equilibrium where there's no incentive to change the strategy. The strategy is to learn, the strategy is to work together, the strategy involves trust. So it's still out, if you will, in terms of what trust means in this environment. So I think that our dean is going to better embrace some of these ideas, and I think he's looking for me to kind of bring some ideas to the mix in terms of the Russier School of Education and work with the Viterbi School of Education at the same time. And as an example, I'll give you one thing.
Anthony, one question before getting to the next one. One of the challenges we face, one of the promises is this personalization of learning, that there's an opportunity to use data and AI to teach directly to the needs of the student, teaching at the right level. But the reality is you have a teacher with 30, 40, 50 students. As a professor, how do you manage that? Maybe you were going to get to that on your next point.
Well, no, Bob, it wasn't, but I think it's a great point that I can comment on. I actually teach my students very differently. I don't teach them in the Carnegie hours way. I teach them metacognitively. In other words, you're taking the content and learning how to use it and move it around for yourself. And the evidence of that is actually not always available, but at least it knows it empowers the learner to be able to do that. And to actually have an example of that, I'll point you to some work that's done by the Life Center. It's an NSF Science of Learning Center that was funded years ago. They talk about lifelong, life-wide, and life-deep learning. So I think as a closing comment, what I'll suggest here is that we can now start to use those ideas that lifelong learning is what you imagine to be, but life-deep learning is what happens during the waking hours. And then life-deep learning, if you will, is actually now start to each individual, each culture, as Beth was saying, in each kind of group has their own learning ability or style. So how can we now start to see AI as fitting in this kind of three space of lifelong, life-wide, and life-deep learning? And then how do we now start to build that trust? And what is that evidence of trust? Trust, the evidence of autonomy, evidence of trust, evidence of agency. And what does that mean? And I agree with Beth. Those things are indeed items and technologies and data and behaviors that we should be able to get from machines. And so our goal then is to apply the pressure to make sure that those kinds of ideas are open and revealed so that we can have a better way to match learners with teachers and machines and those in learning spaces. That's how
Thanks, Anthony. I mean, the implication is that most of the learning will now happen outside of the four walls of a classroom, whether it's after you graduate as a lifelong learner, or whether you are learning outside of school, at home, before school, etc. So how to moderate that, I think, is an interesting question. I want to come, Aaron, I want you to think about that when I come to you, but we do have a question from the audience, from Surinder. How do you ensure that the AI systems being developed are not, by companies, are not exploitative? So that's a perfect lead-in for you, Serena. Please join our discussion on this issue, and please introduce yourself. Serena.
Good morning. I'm Serena Sachs-Mandel. I'm the global CTO at Microsoft for the education industry. And I have had a long history in technology, over 35 years. And most of my experience has been working with emerging technologies and applying them to various industries, and in the last 15 years for education specifically. So being at sort of the center of the AI excitement right now at Microsoft in education, I just want to say first that Microsoft is completely committed to responsible AI. We build our AI with that in mind. We have a whole area. We are very, very committed to privacy, to transparency, to diversity, and all of those principles for responsible AI. I do believe that AI can be a game changer for democratization and equity in education globally. So I pivoted from commercial to education technology about 15 years ago because I believe that technology is an amazing equalizer for education. It gives access to content and actually great teaching regardless of location, which democratizes across all of the countries as long as we can get the content to them through access to internet, through bandwidth, to devices. Then we can democratize education, which is world and life changing. And I think with AI, we can now personalize that experience and help every student learn what they need to learn, when they need to learn it, and how they need to learn it, which really unleashes the talents and gifts and potential for every individual. And I think we're going to see dramatic changes. But getting back to the equity and the ethos issue, there is a dark side. As we all know, technology are tools, and they can be used well, and they can be used to harm. I was listening to the news today, but it's on the news almost every day, that we need ways of managing this technology so that it is used for good, it is used for proper purposes, and not undermined by nefarious actors. So Microsoft is obviously at the heart of what's going on with AI and open AI, and leveraging it for education. But we are also moving carefully when it comes to the teaching and learning space. We're very much focused on the productivity and helping to reduce the number of hours that educators and staff spend on administrative work, so that they can spend more time with students, so that they can build better relationships and help students grow and learn in that human connection. So I think we need to focus AI, even in education, on things that are going to increase the access to real human connection for teachers and students. So that's my perspective on it.
Thanks, Serena. There are a few questions in the chat that we'll probably come back to you on.
Sure.
But I think one of the questions is this issue of transparency, and kind of getting back to the question of surrender. There's another question around kind of the public data that's scraped off the internet. How is that given back to the public? How do you make algorithms transparent? I wonder if you have any commentary on this issue of openness, transparency, and kind of accountability for the algorithms that are used on the data.
Right. So I just want to be super clear that Microsoft, we have a very clear statement from legal, and we do not use our customers' data at all in the large learning models. We don't feed our customers' information and back into the model. So that is an absolute. So you can trust that what you're doing is not getting fed back into the model. Now, there are other issues of, am I getting the right answers to questions? Am I using the right LLM? And to that, we would say the LLM is really OpenAI, which is not Microsoft's company. We leverage that for ChatGPT. However, if you're very concerned about only having the content that you want the LLM to leverage, then put it on Azure and use OpenAI as a service. And then you control the whole model. And we do not use your Azure instance for any of our model learning. So there is complete transparency in that statement that we do not leverage our customers' data at all to grow the AI LLM.
This is a big issue that I think from the World Bank's perspective is something that we have to be cognizant of, the existing biases that exist on the models because they are scraping from publicly available internet data, which many of our countries are not well represented, and ways in which to engage those countries to ensure that their content, their culture, their perspectives are digitized and available in these models, I think is a huge challenge and opportunity.
Right. And one of the things we saw is the opposite. One of our CLR legal representatives was talking with a group of people on an AI roundtable that we host. And somebody raised the issue that they put in a question in Bing AI, and it came back with their own paper. And they were like, how did you get this? And the CLR representative said, did you ever post that online? And she said, yes, I did. Well, so exactly what you're saying, Bob, is that the way to get your information and your published material into the LLM is to put it on the internet, because it will scrape it. And if you don't want it to, then don't post it. It's that simple.
No, absolutely. Aaron, I'm gonna come to you. We have a great question from Vrici Saraf. How can we avoid fitting AI models into current broken education systems and instead reimagine how learning happens and teachers spend their time, which kind of alludes to what Anthony was getting at in terms of kind of reimagining the educational model and education service delivery. Aaron, please introduce yourself, some of the things you're working on. And just to note, Aaron, a lot of our countries that we're working with are looking at competency-based frameworks, competency-based curriculums, which again was a big theme that we discussed in the blockchain community of practice around how to recognize different types of skills and how to build trust into that system, that if we're giving credentials, we can be assured that indeed those students have those skills. So maybe you can touch on a few of those themes. Aaron, over to you.
Yeah, to just sort of introduce myself and give some context, I work in the intersection of education and tech, and I'm currently working within curriculum design in the Office of Product and Program Innovation at Southern New Hampshire University. We're a nonprofit university. We serve more than 3,000 students on campus, but also over 170,000 students across 200 programs, over 200 programs. And many of our students are adult learners and come from, non-traditional backgrounds. And we are a long-established institution, but our larger mission as a university is to deliver accessible, equitable, affordable education at a very large scale. And our, sort of sub-vision, our SNU 2020 vision, is to provide, an engaging sort of flexible learning experience focused on learner goals and outcomes delivered seamlessly in this end-to-end digital ecosystem to help, our population of learners essentially to achieve their goals, right? And so in terms of the recent advances in AI and working within an established system, it's made us more hopeful in fulfilling those goals that we have around equity and, and scale of learning. And we're working on a variety of programs in service of that goal, including drafting frameworks for the university, doing assessment or credit for prior learning. But one of our two projects that I think speaks to what we're talking about here is, first, we're looking at the use of AI, especially generative AI, as a tool to augment the human-led development of competency-based curriculum design, right? So we want that competency-based curriculum design to be both agile in terms of deployment and explicitly mapped to workforce relevant skills. So we're looking both at the potential benefits and the dangers of using AI assistance in that process. And we're also working to enable non-expert users to leverage some of the tools that AI gives us appropriately in the process of their curriculum design, in the hopes that we'll be able to take those lessons learned and sort of move them downstream towards content learning experience and assessment creation. And then the second that sort of speaks to what we've been speaking a little bit about today is a long-term project where we're starting with our competencies that we already have written, performance indicators, content, and assessment, with authentic metadata, right? In this work, we're exploring the application of, semantic understanding, interoperability, knowledge graphing, with the hopes to make that competency-based curriculum more agile, more accessible, in order to use it in some of these emerging AI systems. So, and all of these goals we're sort of leveraging, leveraging AI and Web 3.0 to, we're hoping, increase that equity, accessibility, scalability, and personalization of learning, which several folks have touched on so far as well. I do think that the dangers are great, but the potential benefits are great. And there are a lot of challenges as well working within an existing system of existing competencies. And, I believe you said, Bob, the broken system. There's a lot of things to change about education. And there's a lot of ways that these new technologies can help us change them. And I think the key is really figuring out how best to leverage their capabilities while minimizing any potential harm.
Yeah, no, thanks, Erin. I think this would be an interesting. There's been a lot of research done, but probably more to be done around the role of AI in assessments, which is a great segue into our next session on skills and assessment. We had a group, a separate group called the Hard to Measure Skills Group that were looking at ways in which to measure problem solving, collaboration, creativity, communication. And there was a lot of discussion around the use of gaming tools for engagement, but mainly to collect the data so that the data could kind of lead the assessment of these skills. And I think AI is just kind of supercharging this trend. And it'd be great if anybody has any projects or interest in this area to throw them into the chat, because I think it's an emerging area. I want to pivot to our next discussion, but I don't want to lose this theme on equity and democratization. I'd like all of our discussants to continue to kind of come back to these principles, this ethos of how do we ensure that that access to technology is democratized. And there was a comment from Scott Meyer in the chat around the Matthew effect, around the potential of technology simply supercharging those that are more well off, have more access to technology, and increasing the divide that we see in our societies. How do we balance this with the opportunities not just to teach at the middle, but to accelerate everybody's learning and to allow those students that maybe don't have the best teacher in a country to be able to use technology to accelerate their own learning. So let me maybe ask Alex to jump into the conversation on this theme of skills and assessment and thinking also a little bit about how you see the education system changing through technology. Alex, please introduce yourself and some of the work that you're engaged in.
Hey, I think Alex wasn't able to make it today, unfortunately.
Okay. Alex is hanging out somewhere with John, I imagine. So we'll pull them in later. But let me go to Christina then, Heffernan, because I think there's a good segue on some of the work that you're doing on formative assessment. And again, it's an issue that we're at the World Bank facing as countries are trying to bring students back into the classroom and need to do very rapid assessments of the learning losses as a result of COVID. There's a case in Brazil where they're using kind of AI and openly typed answers to kind of read where students are in different subjects. Christine, I wonder if you can kind of share a little bit of your experience around your work with AI and assessments.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me, Christina Heffernan. I'm the executive director of the Assessments Foundation, which is a nonprofit that was built and brought out of University, Worcester Polytechnic Institute, where my husband is an AI professor. And so we are a true mom and pop organization here. He and I are the founders of Assessments and have brought it to this scale that it is today. And I think that it's important to remember about formative assessment that it's not only about assessing, it's a whole cycle. And it's about the decision about what it is you're going to assess. Then it is the assessment of it. Then it's the feedback and the actions that both the student and the teacher make to address what they just learned from that assessment. And the more rapid that happens, the more learning. And I think one thing that we have found by focusing on formative assessment is that we can narrow that achievement gap that was the Matthew effect, I think is a similar type of idea, is that how do you prevent all these tech tools from taking the top kids and having them skyrocket, but not have the lower knowledge students do that. And in a randomized controlled trial that we did in the state of Maine, by the way, had laptops for every 7th and 8th grade student in the state they started in 2002. So when we did our research study in 2011 to 2015, we didn't have a digital divide. So every student in the study had a computer. That's the beginning. If you're going to do something that's tech, you have to make sure that they have access to the tech. That's a hard thing to get to, but it's the first thing you have to get to. And so then we applied assessments to half of the sample group and showed that those students in the treatment, not only did we raise everybody's scores, but we raised the lower knowledge student scores more. Now, the question is why? We don't actually know. That the study wasn't powered for that. But what we do assume is that it has to do with the fact that we loop the teachers in with the technology boost. So that is now transferred for us into our work with AI. So assessments is a very simple tool. Teachers are in charge. They assign something, but they assign it online instead of in paper. When they assign it online, the students get immediate feedback and they start the formative assessment loop immediately. So when they find out that they're wrong, they immediately get to adjust and retry the problem. So that's really important. But we also give that data on the problems that the teacher picked. We give that data instantly to the teacher to then react with the students. That only works if the problem is scorable. So math problems come in many different shapes and sizes. We pretty much do math. But there's plenty that are scorable by a computer. And it's not just multiple choice. It's things where you put your answer in and we can equate it to the correct answer and say whether you're right or wrong. What we did about 4 years ago was we added machine learning and natural language processing to the open response answers that students put in. So students say, they give a reason or an explanation. We've taken the AI to read what the student wrote, and then we give the teachers a suggested answer or feedback that they can give to the student, it just speeds up the process. Super excited about the new advancements that allow this thing to be even better and hopefully be able to go directly to the student, because getting our natural language processing and our machine learning to go fast enough 4 years ago was hard. And now with GPT-4, it's amazing. And so we're hoping and excited to add that to get better for the teacher, but then also give it straight to the student. But I really liked what was said earlier. We have been talking about making sure the student knows it's an AI that's giving him that feedback. And then we want to study to see if there's a big difference between getting the feedback immediately on their open response. We're also working on reading those darned images, because of course the students also upload images as their answer. How do you read that? Well, it's going to get, that nut's going to get cracked, but we're working on that. So that's a little bit of what we're doing.
Christina, you mentioned a few times for the teacher, and we have a kind of a question from Michael Peck in the chat around the role of leadership. How do you create space for teachers to experiment? How do you change incentive structures? And this gets back to the theme that, again, Anthony kind of introduced from the beginning of kind of the changing nature of education service delivery. I don't know if you have kind of a quick comment on kind of how you're seeing the role of teacher change. And then Dale, I want to come to you to kind of build off of this idea. But Christina, maybe 20 seconds.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember there's a lot of personas when it comes to teachers. And they're not one size fits all. And so they have different knowledge bases, especially with math. So the type of mathematical support they need is different. They have different desires. Like some teachers really like writing their own content, and they find that to be super empowering. Other teachers want to follow a curriculum. And so I think finding ways to know where they are and what their persona is, and then figuring out ways to support them where they are. And I also, like, going back in the chat when I wasn't speaking, I was able to follow the chat. There was a comment about like really changing education, and I'm all for it. I think it's important that we keep moving and changing. I think technology is going to be a real catalyst for that, but we also have to respect the teachers where they are right now. And it's a little bit, I think it's super, I don't know. It's just like they are in classrooms today, finishing up the school year. Like they're standing up. And then I was a teacher. I taught in, my first gig teaching was in Gabon, Africa. It was in the 90s, so we didn't have any tech, but it wasn't that much different even than what I ended up doing in Baltimore and ended up doing in Pittsburgh and in Massachusetts when I was a teacher. It's all very similar right now. And, or even going back 20 years. So we can't say, just change. We have to get them where they are and move them forward. And I think that in itself is something that we can tackle, but it needs to be incremental. And I think what we do is incremental. Like we and teachers are really freaked out by showing the data of a little homework assignment right there on the board. Even that's hard for them to start doing. So.
Now, this is a huge change management challenge, introducing any changes in a system or an organization. And it really does require leadership and kind of leadership at all levels, from the principal to kind of understand these personas and to kind of work with teachers to kind of maximize their skills and identify weaknesses that can be strengthened, down to the teachers of, again, if this idea of personalized learning is really going to be realized, having teachers have more flexibility to respond to individual student needs, if that's even feasible in a classroom of 30.
Is everybody's idea of what personalized learning is that actually efficacious?
No, absolutely.
Because that's not been proven.
No. Dale, over to you to kind of introduce yourself and build on some of these themes. Dale.
Great, thanks, Bob, and thank you for having me and my colleagues from the EdSafe AI Alliance. I'll just provide a little maybe commentary for a couple of moments, and my two others on the leadership team that are here, Jim Larimore, who's the other co-founder like myself, and Beth Avinga, who's the managing director, is also on this call, so they'll participate via chat or elsewhere. But I wanted to pick up on the original theme that I heard, which is about how do you put the learners in control, and I'll extend to the teachers. Really, this technology and the advancements that are being made every day, every moment. I was on a call earlier today with Martin Dougiamis, And we were, sharing, or he was sharing with many others around the world about the advancements that are being made every day with the use of AI in education and the capabilities. But to Christina's point, to be able to utilize that technology in a way that you are trusting what is both there and the capabilities, and understanding what is about that tool and what brings it to life is critical. We started the EdSafe AI Alliance and now has grown into a few hundred participants from about 25 countries, from teachers in the classroom straight through to UNESCO. It's ecosystem wide, and it's focused on how do we increase the trust and understanding and support frameworks for policy development so we can spur both use of this innovation in an equitable manner, but also regulate it where appropriate. And again, I know that conversation in the US was occurring in the last day in particular, that we need to establish these clear guidelines, principles, frameworks, and ways to test these tools so we can then distribute and disseminate what are these tools about, and can you trust them? Do I, as a learner or consumer or teacher, know what they are and how I'm going to use them to amplify the success of every student, not just the top learners, all students, so that we have that equitable success? And so I would just direct people, informationally to the EdSafe AI website. We have a bunch of outputs, resources that are available digging into these issues, but we also have an open invitation to extend and collaborate around the world to establish these collectively and really be a network of networks. All of us represent different groups we want to engage so that we can start to increase the understanding, use, and equitable success of students with AI in the classroom. So I'll pause there, Bob, and again, I know we have a tight schedule.
Thanks, Dale. No, I appreciate it. I think the focus on students is certainly a theme that is running through this conversation. Santiago, I understand we do have a few students on the call. Let me bring, Santiago, you into the discussion to maybe introduce the students. We ran a bit of an experiment a few weeks ago in Colombia, bringing together a number of students to create content using AI tools. And we wanted to have the students themselves just kind of reflect on their own perspectives of the use of this technology. Santiago, let me bring you into the conversation. Please introduce the students on the call. They'll be speaking in Spanish, so those Spanish speakers, please listen, and then Santiago will kind of do a little bit of a contextualization. So Santiago.
Thank you, Bob. And I will try to translate what Natalia is going to say, because maybe it's better to bring an AI algorithm in order to help me to translate, but I will do my best effort. So as Bob mentioned, we have been working around a program that is called Evoke, in which we use, as a part of the program, a graphic novel. And 2 weeks ago, we had a content hackathon in which different kind of students start to use AI in order to produce to help them to produce part of this creative content that we are going to use in Evoke. We have Natalia here with us, so I'm going to give her the word in order to know her experience. So, Natalia, ¿cómo estás? Para que nos cuentes un poco, por favor, sobre tu experiencia en el uso de inteligencia artificial en la hackathon de Cali.
Bueno, hola, buen día a todos. Pues yo creo que la experiencia que tuve pues, fue maravilloso, porque no conocía lo que podía hacer con todas esas herramientas y cómo podía, digamos, transmitir mis ideas y verlas pues ya, digamos, transmitidas a través y, digamos, hechas a través de, pues, de estas herramientas. Entonces creo que fue muy chévere poder, digamos, utilizarlas y de esa manera poder, digamos, ya haber hecho todas las ideas que yo tenía y cómo también me iban las diferentes herramientas que ellos nos brindaban, como también a sustentar y a darle más cuerpo a mis propias ideas. Entonces, creo que me sirvieron mucho como apoyo para poder organizar lo que yo quería transmitir, ilustrar mis ideas y también como poder sustentar todo lo que yo pues quería construir.
Gracias, Natalia. Well, Natalia is telling us that for her, it was a marvelous experience because she didn't know that kind of tools we use during the hackathon, generative AI in order to produce some images and also in order to work with some of the text that they produce. So she didn't know those technologies, and she thinks that AI helped her in order to traduce her ideas and also to give more strength in order to bring their ideas to life. So that is what her thinks that is most impressive around these technologies. Continúa, Natalia.
Entonces, bueno, pues primero yo había hecho como un boceto de, digamos, el personaje, lo hice a mano y por medio de esta herramienta ya utilicé léxica, pude como ya darle, digamos, más cuerpo a la idea que tenía. Entonces, pues fue muy chévere la experiencia porque también, pues yo no conocía nada respecto al manejo de estas herramientas y pues nos brindaron como esa guía para poder, digamos, construir todo este proceso.
Gracias, Natalia. She was telling us about the process. She was in charge to create the character of the graphic novel that we are going to use. And she initially drew the character by hand, and then she gave the character to Lexica, and she saw how the character that she drew came alive with the characteristics that that she has in mind, but also she gave like a specific element, an additional element is that we gave her elements and guide in order to use the AI tools. So she found very useful to have guidance during the process in order to have like a productive use of the algorithm. ¿Algo adicional que quieras agregar, Natalia?
Y pues también utilicé la herramienta BIM de Microsoft para poder, digamos, como yo nunca había construido una novela literaria, entonces siento que ahí pude como poner todas las ideas que tenía y me sirvió mucho como para poder organizar esas ideas y que tuvieran más cuerpo respecto pues a una novela literaria.
The last thing that she wants to share with us is that also she used Bing in order to give form to the ideas because she have never written like a novel. So she had the idea, but she didn't have like the tools in order to give order to the ideas in order to transform it into a novel. So she used Bing in order to give that kind of structure to the ideas and transform it into the argument of the graphic novel.
Bueno, bravo, Natalia. Tienes miedo de hablar en público también, ¿no? Qué fuerte eres.
Gracias.
No, Natalia, if I remember correctly from the hackathon, she has a fear of speaking in public also. So this was a fantastic demonstration. Thanks, Natalia, for sharing with us. Bravo. Thanks, Santiago, also for moderating this discussion. So this is a very, I think, important example of ultimately where we want to see technology being used in terms of empowering students to do things that they otherwise couldn't do. Keeping in mind, I think, a lot of the issues around the ethos that we started the conversation with. Casey, I'm going to come to you in a second on kind of the broader definition of skills, because there's some discussion in the chat around how we define skills and whether they're skills for employment or skills for citizenship. or skills for being a good person and learning. But before coming back to you, Casey, I want to bring Josh Weiss into this conversation from Stanford, because I think he's looking at some of the issues that Natalia and Santiago shared in terms of trends of how content generation is changing as a result of these technologies. Josh, please jump in and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. My name is Josh Weiss. I'm Director of Digital Learning Solutions at Stanford Graduate School of Education. We have a lot of interesting stuff going on, but first I just want to say thank you to everybody for being here, and Natalia, congratulations for making it through. One thing I'm hearing here is how can we center this in the right place? One framing that's really helped me with this is thinking about kind of that human-centered focus. Salima Amershi actually spoke a little while back at the Human-Centered AI conference here at Stanford. I mean, she said, how can we focus on not what these models can do, but what people can do with these models? I think placing the human in the right part of that equation is important. Ken Holstein at Carnegie Mellon, just shouting at him as well. He's also framed this as giving teachers superpowers. So considering what they do, what they want to do, and what can be augmented in that process as well. That's been guiding a lot of thinking on this, and I think should be part of the conversation too. So just a little scattershot of considerations here as well. I've been asked to speak a little bit about content generation and curation, how it intersects with education. I have to say the first thing top of mind for me right now is that content generation has essentially gone to zero. When the internet came along, famously, people were saying content distribution has gone to zero. You don't have to print out flyers and staple them on the sides of telephone poles anymore. You can just put it on the internet. Distribution has gone to zero. Now content creation and potentially content curation has gone to zero. What does this mean for learners? What does this mean for educators? Well, I think one thing that we can definitely say is that these systems are going to be ingesting more and more content. Right now, LLMs are very heavily trained on text. Going forward, it's very clear that it's going to be multimodal ingestion, meaning that video, audio, all of these are going to be fair game for bringing in content, and then you making that potentially an engine or pieces that can be assembled into content curation or generation. So the learning objects that can be created are really anything that's ever been digitized quite soon, which is very overwhelming, but also exciting. One framing on this with teachers that I've been speaking to is, does this feel like an abundance or does this feel like a glut? Abundance being the positive aspect. This feels like we have so many teaching objects that we can pull from and cohere on our own. Or does it look like we're inundating and it's not directed and targeted enough at what we really want students to be able to do at the end of the day? So that's where teachers, I think, are still really important, is directing how this content generation works for the learner. I'll also say a little bit about how content creation and generation and curation is really simpler than ever. So Andre Karpathy came to a hackathon here at Stanford. He said the hottest new programming language is English. So to me, what that means is that 10 years ago, if you wanted to create some kind of an app, if you wanted to create some kind of content, if you wanted to make something automated, you really had to get into the code. That's not true anymore. A lot of this can be done within ChatGPT, for example. A lot of code can be developed and a lot of tasks can be refined simply by asking it in natural language, like you would an intern. So if everybody has essentially infinite interns, what does this mean for our ability to spin up new content creation and new learning objects as well? I would say students should be a part of this too. And they are, whether we acknowledge that or not. Students are creating these learning objects right now too. How can we direct them to do this well and do this intentionally? I think is a big part of the conversation. So there's this big burst of computational capacity from non-technical people. I will shout out as well, there's actually a hackathon this Saturday in Oakland, if you're living in the Bay Area, being put on by the TFA Reinvention Lab and Reach Capital. And the idea is, can we get educators in the room with some of these very simple building tools, and can they create something in a morning? It only lasts from 9 to 1. And the answer is yes, you can build some pretty substantial stuff at this point with 4 hours, a team of people, and the right tools, even if you are not a coder yourself. The last point I'll just kind of touch on briefly is this idea of the authenticity crisis. If everybody can produce something right now then what is salient, what is important, and what is authentic, I think is something that learners and educators will have to grapple with extensively. So I was a middle school teacher for 7 years. I taught in different countries and different places. But one thing that was always true is that my students were taking in digital content, and I was downstream from the decision about how they were deciding to pick, curate, design, and ultimately reproduce content they were seeing online. What does it look like to make them more in the driver's seat on these decisions? Sometimes this is called digital literacy. I think digital literacy is going to have a whole new flavor to it now that all of this new content is coming out there, especially from non-curated places. Anybody can create this stuff at this point at an enormous scale. So what's happening right now towards these efforts? Well, I'll just touch real briefly on a couple of things that's happening in my neck of the woods. So at the Graduate School of Education here at Stanford, we're thinking about how to model some of these co-building and co-designing conversations. Who needs to be in this? Well, traditionally, you have kind of technologists sitting in one room, educators sitting in another room, and researchers sitting in a third room. Is there a way to bring these people together literally in the same room? So we have convenings, and I'll say that we had back in January, when ChatGPT was kind of on fire with teachers, we brought together 50 teachers, we brought together some of our researchers, and we invited OpenAI. And we just asked the teachers for about 2 hours, what are you using this for? What feels like a challenge? What feels like an opportunity? And getting those voices in the same room is really important. Lastly, the building of this stuff. It's kind of new. The tech stack on this is very, very new, but it's quite clear that you don't need to be a coder to build this stuff. So how can we help people to design this? And how can we be stewards of good processes? The Stanford Accelerator for Learning right now has a seed grant call. We just had 16 people. We have professors, we have staff, we have students. And the idea is we're going to support them as they kind of consider this design process and build process, and also the critical issues in the context of learning as they think about how we might build these tools to improve teaching and learning. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Josh. I mean, you've kind of teed up a number of points that I think a lot of our countries are grappling with around what are the types of skills that are kind of required. What do we mean by digital skills? What are the skills of the future? How should we be preparing youth and students for a rapidly changing world? I mean, you touched on kind of digital literacy to kind of understand kind of what's true and what's not true. You've touched on collaboration and this concept of co-building. You touched on content creation as a skill, perhaps for teachers, but as we showed in Colombia, for students as well, to really kind of own their learning process. Casey, I wonder if you can kind of jump in and just share some of your reflections from LinkedIn, both from an employment perspective, but recognizing that the skills for employment are rapidly changing. And I think it was, I don't know, McKinsey report, some report that highlighted less the hard skills and more the softer, or what they mentioned, the durable skills, these 21st century skills as critical skills for the future. Which gets to the question of how do you teach these, how do you integrate in the curriculum, and how do you assess them, which we touched upon with the discussion with Christina. But Casey, maybe over to you and some reflections from your perspective.
Thank you so much. This has been such a rich conversation, so I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to weigh in with just a little bit that I can. So my name is Casey Weston. I co-lead LinkedIn's Data for Impact program, a program where we use the aggregated, anonymized insights that come from our platform to inform the work of policymakers at the World Bank, the IDB, OECD, and other organizations. So I put a few links in the chat first with reference to the principles that Beth started us out with, as well as the ones that Serena mentioned in her chat, LinkedIn's AI principles, so those that guide our use of AI in our platform. Second, just wanted to shout out Josh. So we contributed with a small piece of data to the conversation that the Human-Centered AI team at Stanford was working with when they put together an AI index for this year. And then finally, you asked a great question about what defines skills. And so this will lead a little bit more into the questions you just asked. And so a link there to a book by Natasha Iskander on Do Skills Make Us Human, right? So defining skills is actually really critical because we think of it in terms of our ability to deploy skills in the workforce or in an educational setting, but under the right circumstances, they may determine whether or not you get citizenship or can live in a certain area or can excel in life, right? So they really do humanize us in an important way that we should all be considering. So a few things that our data can tell us about skills with regards to AI. So the first is skills for using AI. We've seen that asking where do these skills sit has been a really meaningful question for some of our policy maker colleagues. We know that they are disproportionately positioned in a few countries. India, US, Germany, Israel, and Canada really lead the pack. The skills, the AI skills being used by members in those countries are more than 150% of the global average. But when we look a little bit deeper, we see that in those countries and really just about every country around the world, there are gender gaps in terms of the members of the workforce that have skills to manage and develop AI. So the split is about 70-30, meaning that within the set of people using AI-related skills like question answering or natural language processing, men are twice as likely to be engaged in that than women, right? And so that has implications for the equity of everything, right? And so we really need to be working on that as policymakers, as private sector organizations, and the civil service sector as well. Civil society sector as well. The other question that we get is often around the occupations that are the source of AI skills. And what we're finding is that, of course, they come from what you would expect, data scientists, et cetera, but they're also coming from academia. And that's because it's such an emerging field. So really thinking about how we can engage academic institutions to be bolstering these conversations around equity and democratization as much as possible in their AI curriculum is something that can ensure the development of equitable AI moving forward. So this other question that you're asking is not about the AI skills themselves, like computer vision, et cetera, but rather the skills that will be required to work with AI. So some of our services, some of our surveys have suggested that nearly 70% of workers would delegate as much work as they could to AI if they knew it could be done at high quality, right? And so the leaders that we're surveying in the workforce agree that they would love to see their workforce leverage AI to be more productive. So rather than actually cutting jobs, which is a lot of the conversation right now, we're seeing that leaders are actually anticipating being able to use the same headcount to be even more productive. And so they've actually echoed some of the comments that have been made here when we survey them, specifically some of the comments that Josh just made about how digital literacy will mean something new given the concerns around authenticity, right? So the leaders that we've surveyed have suggested that analytical judgment, flexibility, and emotional intelligence will be some of the most critical skills for using AI effectively and being able to ensure that the results are meaningful, authentic, equitable, et cetera. And so when we're thinking about training up people to work with AI, again, as Josh just said, the hottest new programming language is English. So maybe the prevalence and importance of coding skills will be moderated by this need for clear problem solving and analytical judgment instead. The final piece I wanted to touch on, and I'm just going to throw one more link for you in the chat, is the role of AI in actually assessing and identifying meaningful skills. So we've done some work at LinkedIn to think about skills first hiring, meaning that rather than just using qualifications, you're actually trying to assess and determine the relevance of the skills of a worker to a particular position to engage them effectively. And using this skills first approach can increase hiring pipelines by as much as 10x, right? So you're really reaching a much larger swath of the population, and it's a more equitable swath as well. So women are more likely to benefit from this. People who have not gone to college and don't benefit from those qualifications are more likely to benefit from this. But to do this, you need to be thinking about all 40,000 skills that we have on LinkedIn, in our case, among 930 million members. There's no way for us to engage in these conversations or do these types of analyses without AI. And so this is something that Christina mentioned when she was saying that AI is speeding up the learning process, and that, a few years ago, getting natural language processing and machine learning to go fast enough was not possible. Now it is. That capacity of AI to speed up the skills assessment and identification processes will be critical to moving forward with this skills-first approach to hiring, which we believe will also advance equity. So those are just a few thoughts on the AI intersection with skills, both on the AI skills side, as well as the skills needed to benefit from AI for the rest of us who are not building AI machines, and the ways that it can affect that transition and that pipeline from education to the workforce.
Thanks so much, Casey. I mean, again, you kind of highlight some of these very difficult skills to define, difficult skills to integrate into a curriculum, and difficult skills to assess. Jim Goodell kind of put a note into the chat, and Jim, I'll ask you to join the conversation in a second around kind of learning sciences. So the question is then, how do we teach these skills? And kind of what do we have to learn from the rich literature around learning sciences? But before we go there, I want to see if Alexander Nicholas is with us and can kind of share some final perspectives on this kind of area of content before we move to some reflections on the discussion. Alexander, are you with us?
I am.
Awesome.
So just really happy to be here. Just really excited about today's conversation. So just very quickly, I'm Alexander Nicholas from XPRIZE. We are a global platform to drive innovation. One of the exciting areas, or was just grand challenge areas for us, is education. For additional context, I would say I joined XPRIZE about a year ago. Prior to that, I was at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where my work focused on institutional transformation. So how do we help post-secondary institutions transform to deliver better equitable outcomes for students? A few learnings from that. One is we have amazing people working within these systems, whether you're at the K-12 level or in post-secondary. The second piece is, for institutions to transform, you must really think about their culture, their structure, and their business model. The third piece is it's really hard for institutions to transform and actually meet the needs of students. And because, as you know, the needs of students are rapidly changing and growing. So which brings me to my current role at XPRIZE. As part of what we really want to think about is how do we leverage the new technologies that are coming online, particularly AI, to think about how do we create different, better models to deliver equitable outcomes for students. A few things we are responding to. One is we call the global learning loss, and I think many of you know what the pandemic did, and then those effects were acutely even more challenging in the global South and for communities, low-income communities across the globe. The second piece is teacher resilience, and how can we reimagine the role of teaching. And because we know we have a sort of a mass quitting that's actually happening here. And so it's teacher burnout, the administrative load, the cognitive stress that's being created from students returning with different sets of needs post-pandemic. And I would say the third piece is assessment. So as you can think about assessment, it's informative assessments in terms of how do we help students learn faster, more efficiently. The third piece is around is assessment in terms of moving to more of a skills-based economy. How can we make this process of hiring more equitable? How do we remove the human bias in the process? And I think there's a ton of work there. So at XPRIZE, what our current model is, we engage experts like yourselves and to create what we call these big audacious prizes to drive innovation around a particular topic. I would say one area of interest for us is really think about the sort of the skills economy and learning and employment records, and how do we actually make that a tool to drive equity. The same with reimagining AI in classrooms. So let's not just as we think about AI in the classroom, let's really think about how do we address an entrenched historical challenge of communities not having adequate access to high quality teaching, high quality resources. Is this a way for us to think about different models for educating communities that have been sort of historically underserved, whether it's in the U.S. context or even in the global South? So part of my contribution today to today's conversation is that we are going through what we call a global visioneering process, and where we would like to land is help us think about what are those big, audacious, field-moving, equity-centered challenge areas that we should be thinking about that we can actually drive change for those communities that we are trying to impact. So I'll stop there.
No, thanks, Alexander. I mean, that's an ambitious agenda, but one that's very much in line with many of the discussions we have with our ministers of education on how to reform education systems. But a lot of discussion in the chat is around this issue of, again, equity. How can students that maybe don't have devices, don't have internet connectivity or robust internet connectivity, can't pay for their data plans, don't have electricity, how are they going to be able to participate and benefit from these technologies? Asya, I want to come to you on this issue of equity and the existing challenge we have just around foundational skills, education poverty, the fact that the vast majority of 10-year-olds in many of the countries we work in can't read a simple paragraph. How do we balance these two crises, this crisis of just foundational learning with the opportunities to accelerate learning? Asya, I wonder if you can give us some reflections, and then Mike, I'll come to you with further reflections on this issue of equity. But Asya, and please, for these wrap-ups, we got about 12 minutes left, so 2 to 3 minutes, please.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bob. And it's such a rich conversation that I struggle to understand how to wrap up. But while I was listening to some of these great ideas and practical applications of AI, there's one statistic that kept going on in my head. If you're born in a high-income country, 9 out of 10 children can read by the age of 10. If you're born in a low-income country, 9 out of 10 children cannot read, and similar statistics for numeracy. So the issue of equity becomes really, really important. So if we suspend disbelief for a moment and assume access to the digital content and hardware is there, then how can AI serve the students in having better mechanisms for them to learn these skills and for teachers to be able to teach these skills? And this agenda of how AI how developments in AI, what teachers need and those who support teachers need to have skills on is how to work with AI and how to teach with AI and teach about AI. And those are very different skill sets. And if you go back to thinking about many of the teachers are not equipped to teach the basic foundational skills. So the agenda for those of us who are in the philanthropic sector becomes how do we ensure, how do we create public goods that will allow developers to take on these technologies more efficiently in their products, but how do we also support, for example, grant making and investment and challenge funds that allow developers that are from the countries that this 9 out of 10 statistics is targeting, the developers, the researchers, the educators, to actually produce more content that is serving the needs of underserved population, that produces evidence and full evidence about what's needed for those implementation. And thirdly, and importantly, supports government in being able to commission and manage performance and have safeguards on data protection, digital literacy, etc. So looking forward to learning from this group further.
Thanks, Asya. No, I mean, we debate this this often in our team and try to imagine what the future might look like. And kind of one scenario is that the actual scarce resource are the quality, high qualified, engaging, inspiring teachers. And the abundant resource is access to technology. And will we see a world in the future where the most disadvantaged will only be learning from technology, where the better off will have that personal touch and that one-on-one or small group discussion with a highly qualified teacher? Is that a future that we might be moving towards?
So I think the design aspect becomes really important. How do we guard against the Matthew effect? How do we make sure that that 9 out of 10 statistics doesn't widen because of those who have access to AI and those who don't. I think the technology has real potential, and those of you who would have seen Sal Khan's video shows how it can support teachers, make their lives easier.
Paul, welcome. Paul, let me bring you into the conversation since you're here. Paul is from Kenya. Do you have any reflections on this conversation?
Oh, nice, and thank you for the invite. Indeed, I'm enjoying great lessons and experiences from the members across board. And I want to imagine that this is a very robust platform for us to exchange ideas on how to scale education beyond borders in a bid to help accelerate access and equity to our learners.
Thank you, Paul. Paul is one of 150 some odd policymakers across Africa and 13 countries that are engaging right now in what we call our Policy Academy. And they are debating these very issues around how to implement hybrid learning that is more resilient and how to develop educational systems that bring out and support students in the development of digital skills. So, Paul, thanks for jumping in on purpose or accidental. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Let me go. Ironically, Mike Tricano, who is on leave from our institution with the Brookings Institution, is having connectivity issues. So he is part of the digital divide right now. So Mike, if you were able to throw anything into the chat, please do. But I want to go to Matthew. There have been a lot of comments in the chat around the content issue, IP copyright. And Matthew, without getting too technical, I wonder if you can bridge a little bit the discussions we had around blockchain technology and these issues around ownership of content. Matthew, over to you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, perfect.
Good. So yeah, just really thinking about, obviously, I'm an educator and also a business person, so I kind of sit at the intersection of Web3 and education. I'm just really thinking about first principles in terms of data security. I know we spoke at the beginning, we were hearing about the need for ethics and data being very fundamental to that. But I suppose really first principle is to secure data with zero knowledge proofs. That's what I'm thinking about. So highly technical, but perhaps
you got to in plain English. What is a zero knowledge proof?
Exactly.
This is a test for you.
I know. It's so interesting to be in this world and see everything colliding at a rapid speed. But technology doesn't need to be complicated. Zero knowledge proof is simply a way of revealing aspects of data which are pertinent instead of all aspects of data. But it's a very effective way of safeguarding privacy in data and safeguarding large data sets from abuse, really. And because we don't have much time, I'll also say it's a very good way of countering disinformation.
Thanks, Matthew. Do you have any other details? I want to bring a very concrete example of how this could be used.
Yeah, so for disinformation, if you're looking at a data source for online learning, so maybe things with the Learning Passport, which UNICEF has developed, if you want to check that that's come from a good source and that you're also a verified student, zero knowledge proofs could do that very easily without giving away the identity of the student and without giving away the identity of a body of students who may be targeted for misinformation.
Now, this is critical. I mean, one of the challenges that we face is how to engage a broader ecosystem of solution providers working with the public sector and ministries of education. And kind of one example in India, where they have the XStep project and the Diksha platform, is how do you work with a company like MindSpark that has an adaptive learning system that wants to use some of the student data, but that wants to be protected, wants to apply their algorithms, but that's their own intellectual property. How do you manage that trustless exchange of data to kind of ensure both privacy and ownership of IP across these two entities? And zero knowledge proof might be a way to accomplish that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would ask, why would the data, what exactly did anybody want to do with the data in the first place? And what would you like it to be used for? So reverse engineer. And very nice piece can help with that. But I'm sorry, I don't want to take all the time. We have 3 minutes left, so perhaps another conversation.
Yeah, let me. I promised Jim I would give him a minute to just bring us back to learning sciences, because I think at the end of the day, a big challenge is how do you actually teach some of these skills. Sure. Jim, do you want to maybe give us a minute on your thoughts around applying learning sciences?
Sure. It really comes down to the learning experience and providing feedback. And we know a lot more than we did 30 years ago about how people learn. And for too often we focus on just kind of seat of the pants assumptions about what's going to work, but we need to look at the science. There are things like earlier in the chat, someone had mentioned, wouldn't it be great if we could just sit around and have conversations with AI and learn all we needed to learn. Well, there is a desirable level of difficulty. Learning takes effort for it to work well. So matching the amount of effort and engagement of the learner is something that just casual conversation might not be enough. Learners need to be challenged. So that's just one concept within the learning sciences that we need to make sure we apply. And there are so many more that we don't have time to get into, but let's not forget the learning sciences.
Yeah, no, we had some great discussions with Dan Schwartz on his work at Stanford, with the Center for Healthy Minds at Wisconsin around learning sciences. If you want to look on our website, there's a series that we did around learning sciences. And I think that the challenges around engagement, around motivation, agency, and as you say, you have to do the work. I mean, at the end of the day, one of the fears that we have is that writing itself is a form of thinking and struggling through those thoughts and putting them down. And we want to avoid the case where a tool like ChatGPT takes away this effort of actually thinking through writing. And at the end of the day, we want very thoughtful thinkers. This has been a fascinating discussion. It's recorded. We'll be sharing this with all of you. I thank everybody for their time. We'll kind of look at the schedule and probably come back in a number of months to kind of revisit where we are with both AI and the blockchain and any other frontier technologies. Please drop any ideas that you have in the chat of things that you might want to discuss in a future forum like this. And I hope you've made connections between each other, and we'll follow up with each other to kind of deepen our own knowledge in this field. So again, thanks everybody. Thanks to the partners at the Learning Economy Foundation, and we look forward to our next discussion. Thanks, everybody.